Path of Exile 2's 0.5 update is just a few days away from being revealed, and unlike the normal release schedule for Path of Exile patches, we're not really sure just how much of the update is going to be unveiled on May 7th, because the actual launch of the Return of the Ancients isn't until May 29th. So it's likely that some components of the patch will be held back to be teased in that 3-week gap, and I think it's also quite likely that the patch notes themselves won't be made available right away either. However, so far we've received 4 teasers for this patch, and they all appear to be pointing towards the same thing, which is the large endgame improvement update we're expecting in 0.5, which was originally planned for 0.4 and had to be postponed due to not being ready. Now the interesting thing about that is that by the time 0.5 actually launches, the last of the Druids update will have been running for almost 6 months. So it's possible that the scale of these endgame changes were completely underestimated, not just for 0.4 initially, but also for 0.5. And that's the reason that this update has taken so long to arrive, because perhaps they realised that they can't really delay the big endgame patch for another league, and I've discussed in a previous video that it's likely the new endgame will have several systems that work together to create the endgame progression, and these systems need to be all fully finished and good to go before the patch can go live, which may be why we've had to wait an extra month or so to get here. Now before I get onto the first teaser, which I think is the one that has the most substance, I'll just briefly summarise my thoughts on each of the others. We had this teaser here titled Uncover the Truth. My initial thoughts on this one, like many other people, were Kalguran runes, so possibly an expedition update. The whole uncovering the truth would fit there, but the big spider boss, or whatever this is, doesn't really fit with any of the expedition lore we have up to this point, so perhaps this is a teaser for the new league mechanic instead, or some kind of new endgame addition, and this monster is perhaps part of the new ancients that we're going to be seeing in this patch. Maybe it's one of their guardians. Next we have this teaser titled Stop the Madness, with the description Overcome the Insanity. And this teaser also has some dialogue which appears to be the NPC Elder Maddox that we've already met in the interludes. And it looks like this is Delirium, perhaps a new Delirium encounter to go along with the mirror encounter that we already have. And there's this figure seemingly trapped in the reflection here. This kind of reminds me somewhat of the Acts 4 encounter where you first come across the Delirium mechanic. And that's a quest there where there's a character, Freya Hartlin, who's trapped in the Binding Circle, and when you actually free her, it's revealed that she's actually Tang Marzu, the trickster god. That's the guy that whispers all of the dialogue to you during the Delirium mechanics, and perhaps this will be another one of his tricks. And interestingly, there is actually some dialogue from Elder Maddox about something he calls the Snake, which may be referencing Tang Marzu. Then last night we got this Breach teaser titled Now It Is Our Time, with the description They Shall No Fear, and the thumbnail says the dreamer must wake. Now the teaser itself appears to be Aelith along with the rest of the monastery monks performing some kind of ritual, perhaps to attempt to awaken Chayula, and we get to see the monastery with the Genesis tree intact. So I expect Breach will be getting an update here, possibly adding the Hive and Fortress encounters to PoE 2, along with the newer version of Unstable Breaches, and perhaps some new boss encounters. And the Genesis tree is the real big mystery here. How will it function in PoE 2, and how exactly will the crafting work if that's indeed what it does? There's also a sword being showcased in this teaser, and this should be an indication of swords being added in 0.5, because I just don't really think that they put this in here and not expect the community to immediately draw that conclusion. But in terms of lore, this could be the PoE 2 version of United in Dream, which I think makes the most sense considering the context here, but it could also be Innsbury Edge. Okay, let's get back to the original teaser, which is this one right here, with the thumbnail reading Ancient Secrets Rise. This is a crazy teaser visually, by the way, the animation is really good, but this is quite clearly the Infinite Atlas being shown here. We can see the burning monolith as part of this giant construction, and there's a huge tower of these statues sitting on top. Now, what I think this is teasing is the new endgame progression system, which is something PoE 2 has really lacked. This kind of sense of direction in the endgame. You have the whole cleansing the corruption and finding citadels, but the movement on the Atlas generally feels quite aimless, and I think there's 2 main reasons for that. The first is that completing objectives on the Atlas doesn't really change the Atlas all that much. You have the corrupted areas that become cleansed, That's a good example of this in action, but it's not much of a high-level change to how you actually traverse the Atlas. More so, it's just providing a bit of agency for how you choose to farm your maps in that local region. But the other reason is the bigger one, because the main meta progression of the Atlas is supposed to come from obtaining your Atlas passive tree points and customizing your gameplay experience on the Atlas. The problem is, the Atlas tree in Path of Exile 2 absolutely sucks. Those are my words, but also the words of game director Mark Roberts during the 0.4 Q&A.
I opened that tree yesterday and I was like, oh, this sucks.
It's a little tragic.
It sucks.
So, they're hyper aware of this issue, and it has to be one of the systems that finds itself near the top of the list for improvements in 0.5 because of just how bad it is. The Atlas passive tree in PoE 2 is extremely bland, and it fails to provide agency over your mapping experience in a way that PoE 1's version managed to do very well indeed. When discussing this topic, Mark mentioned that the tree would be reinvented, even going as far to say that their ideas for this system aren't even in the same universe.
Spoiling the fact we are doing something, and I'll tell you, it's not even, it's not the same. It's not similar. It's like, it's in a whole different universe. So it's kind of like, which makes it a little bit hard, because obviously we're in this state where we want feedback about the endgame.
Yeah, it's
and so I do want to put, like, people should keep giving feedback, because I don't want people to think, they're reworking it endgame anyway, so I'm not going to say anything, just in case. You never know.
There's
and
also different parts of the endgame that kind of are like independent of the, just things like how the Atlas tree works.
Yep.
So,
But, yes, that tree is effectively going to be completely reinvented. So.
I think this may suggest that we'll end up with something new and something not even like PoE 1's Atlas tree. It may be that they have no ideas for this to truly reinvent the concept of this system, and GGG have never been afraid of taking risks when it comes to new mechanics. We've seen that many times in the past, and I think whatever we end up getting to replace the Atlas tree will tie into the meta progression of the Infinite Atlas and make it feel less aimless and more customizable in terms of player agency. Now, speaking of Atlas progression, part of the aimlessness feeling of the Infinite Atlas is the lack of micro-progression towards a larger goal. We do have the corruption cleansing, but before finding and reaching those zones, you have these dead periods where nothing much is happening. Mark also goes into detail on this topic in the 0.4 Q&A.
Something that, like PoE 1 with the whole complete your Atlas being a very clear, very obvious goal. You just complete all the maps and you get your Atlas is complete. And then there's heaps more beyond that, of course. There's all the boss farming and all the different progressions, and even that has like multiple quests throughout the main quest line with the different pinnacles and all that. We just don't have any of that, really. It's just immediately into this infinite unguided adventure, and there's a little bit of things with the corrupted zones and bit of that, and like, the burning monolith, but it's still mostly unguided. You don't really feel like you have, like, I've completed the main thing, now I'm going to farm, at the moment. It's pretty unsatisfying, I'd say. So really trying to drive that home. And then the other thing that, honestly, we spoke about upgrading the leagues and adding more bosses is, like, that whole, like, having King in the Mists and Olroth as the pinnacle bosses of the leagues, just being, like, copy-pastes from PoE 1, was not our end goal, you know what I mean? Like, they're a bit sad as pinnacles right now, and, like, honestly we need to up the epic a lot. So we've got a lot of that coming.
So based on this, I think we can expect to see a bit more of a static and obvious progression goal for the Atlas. And perhaps that's what we're seeing in this teaser, with the biomes being surrounded by these structures. Maybe completing biomes will be somewhat similar to map completion in PoE 1 and progressing your Atlas tree, and it will push forward the meta progression of the Infinite Atlas, upgrading all of the biomes and getting you closer to whatever new Pinnacle content will be available in this patch. Mark also discussed the League upgrades in that clip, which is what I think we're seeing in those other teasers, and he talks about the copy-pasted bosses from PoE 1 in Olroth and the King in the Mists, so I think we can expect some new Pinnacle bosses for those mechanics in 0.5, which is quite exciting. Now overall, it looks like this is going to be a massive patch for Path of Exile 2, and they've even said as much, going as far to say that it's one of the biggest updates they've ever done for either game. So I think there'll be a ton of new content to dig into, and we've only got a few days to wait for the reveal, but it's still quite a while yet before we can actually jump in and play. Hopefully they have a bunch of teasers planned for that 3-week gap. But what are your thoughts on the teasers and those comments from the Q&A? Let me know by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.